No, Prussia shouldn't have accepted the crown from the gutter. In case you don't know what I'm talking about, 1848 was a massive revolution year across Europe, where in Germany specifically, German unification was paired with calls for liberal constitutions. As revolutions rocked the region, the German Confederation was practically dissolved, and most German princes felt forced to concede on both counts. Across various states, constitutions and reforms were granted, while the National Assembly was created in Frankfurt, to which most of the German states each sent representatives to work on creating a constitutional framework for a united German state. The parliament was mainly made up of upper class and upper middle class Germans, who swiftly began fighting over the specific purpose of the assembly. Were they the basis for an actual parliament with legislative power standing above the various monarchs, or was their purpose to merely write a constitution and work and compromise with the various monarchs? A lot of other debates were also to be had, about how regionalism should work within this new Germany, how the new German government should be structured, was it to be a monarchy or a republic, should the monarch be elected like with the Holy Roman Emperor, should Austria as German territories be included or not, if so, should the Habsburgs dominate this union, and just how centralized should this Germany even be? How much autonomy should the princes retain? The Frankfurt Assembly was already internally divided, trying to answer these questions, as various factions had different motivations, and the assembly also had to be wary not to lose the support of the German princes, who for now were allowing their debating. But as time dragged on, the assembly failed to realize that conditions in Germany were changing, and their standing to create a unified state was swiftly weakening. The biggest waves of revolution were over, and German princes were already moving back on their promises of reform, and reconsidering their support for the Frankfurt Assembly. Even still, in March of 1849, a constitution was finished in Frankfurt. It was agreed the state should be a constitutional monarchy, with the King of Prussia elevated to the hereditary Emperor of the Germans, as Prussia was the most powerful of the German states, with the exception of Austria. But the Austrians were not participating in the Frankfurt Assembly at all, and the Austrian Emperor had just passed laws further centralizing his empire. It was clear they had no interest in leading a unified German state. In the end, most German states actually recognized this constitution, but Prussia, Austria, Bavaria, Saxony and Hanover refused, meaning all of the most powerful states hadn't. The assembly then went to Frederick Wilhelm IV of Prussia, offering him the official position of Emperor of the Germans. Seemingly, this was a golden opportunity for Prussia to seize the moment, unifying Germany under their leadership with Austria out of it. Surely, even if they planned to ignore the liberal aspects of the unification later, there would be no reason to refuse. Yet he did, calling the offer a crown from the gutter. To us, this sounds very strange, but Frederick Wilhelm lived in a very different time. For the conservative monarchs of the age, crown and monarchy, and the power derived from it, came from God, came from status, came from age, and most certainly did not come from some parliament. He noted that if the other German princes had offered him the title, he may have accepted, but simply put, he did not think the Frankfurt Assembly had the authority to crown him. So, if he had accepted, he would have inherently debased the institution of monarchy, accepting the fact that the people and popular assemblies could create and give away royal titles, and therefore implicitly meaning that they also have the power to take them away. In accepting this German Empire, Friedrich Wilhelm would need to accept that Parliament was above him, was above the very concept of monarchy. But that was the ideological reason for saying no. Perhaps we may imagine a timeline where Frederick Wilhelm is more liberal-minded, or is more cynical, accepting the title only for the purpose of unification, while fully intending to undermine the liberal constitution that came with it. Considering that Frederick Wilhelm and his successor Wilhelm were both hardcore conservatives, this second option is more likely. But either way, let's assume that at least for show, they embraced the Frankfurt Assembly with open arms, not undermining its liberal aspects, at least until unification is a done deal. Friedrich Wilhelm IV of Prussia starts styling himself as Friedrich Wilhelm I of Germany. What is next? Well, there are a couple important factors to consider, most notably the other great powers. First, France. They, that same year, had a revolution of their own. As a result, they might not be in the best position to intervene either way, focusing more on their own issues. But we know for a fact that they wouldn't be happy about a united Germany, liberal or not. And historically, they refused to support revolutionary regimes in neighboring Baden and the Palatinate. It's also important to note that Napoleon III was the new president of France, well known for his ambitions on the west bank of the Rhine, and they may even demand compensation just for staying neutral, if not threatening to outright support Austria in hopes of expansion. Britain then is mostly just committed to the balance of power, and as such, will be watching these developments carefully. They may even be sympathetic to the idea of a liberal, unified Germany, but certainly not to the extent that they would intervene on their side in a war. More than likely, the two Western powers mostly just abstain from this crisis, which just leaves Austria and Russia, who both have very strong feelings on the matter. For Austria, the move is unacceptable, since they are the traditional hegemons of Germany, and for both Russia and Austria, they would have serious concerns about the rise of liberalism in Europe. Ever since the Congress of Vienna, Prussia, Austria and Russia have made up the Holy League, an alliance with the explicit intention to jointly defend monarchy and absolutism in Europe. Prussia not just threatening the status quo by unifying Germany, but doing it in a way that is so explicitly liberal would leave little doubts in their minds in terms of what needs to be done next. As war looms in Eastern Europe, France and Britain, if anything, try to get Prussia to back down, realizing that if Prussia lost such a war, the balance of power may be upset as well. Beyond that, we also need to wonder just how strong support for Prussia within Germany would even be, specifically from the kingdoms which actually matter. For many, two things were most important: conservatism and self-preservation. During the worst of the revolutions, self-preservation won out. Hence, we see them agreeing to constitutions they despise and agreeing to recognize in principle the Frankfurt Parliament. But we already saw historically that the major states of Bavaria, Saxony and Hanover in the end refused to recognize the constitution. It is doubtful that all of these major states would simply follow Prussia blindly, at the very least dragging their feet, if not coming to resist and oppose their unification attempt. In terms of the population rising up in any state that refuses, that is quite unlikely, because we know that it historically did not happen. The German princes had all but agreed to unification and constitutionalism historically, but when things calmed down and they began reversing or ignoring such reforms, and when Friedrich Wilhelm refused the crown, when the Frankfurt Assembly became defunct, we did not see an all too major second wave of revolutions. To give Prussia the biggest benefit of the doubt, we might assume all German states which recognize the constitution historically, as well as Prussia, are fully committed to this unification attempt, and none are going to decide to abandon the project in the face of Austro-Russian pressures. I'm sorry for the quick intermission, but by far most of you aren't subscribed. To keep up to date with all the latest releases, consider doing so. Thank you. Well, in order to know what might happen in such a situation, we need to look no further than our own history. It is rarely discussed, but after declining this crown from the gutter, Prussia immediately afterwards tried to unify Germany anyways, with only some minor changes, making the unification more conservative in nature. Prussia even based the second attempt on the very constitution they had just sabotaged, with Prussia inviting all German states, except Austria, to create a new union, which we now refer to as the Erfurt Union. Most German states had actually agreed to join, with the exception of the Four Kings Alliance, and of course, Austria. Yet, even amongst these, Saxony and Hanover had initially agreed to join, so long as Prussia convinced Bavaria and Württemberg as well. Within this Erfurt Union, we find the most likely parallel for what would have happened had Prussia accepted the crown from the gutter. For the Erfurt Union, the Frankfurt Constitution was slightly changed. Parliament would still be elected, but votes were to be weighted by wealth. Of course, Friedrich Wilhelm was to be the head of state of this new Germany, and while some states dropped out, the majority of German states still agreed to participate. Yet, the Hungarian Revolution, which was taking up by far most of Austria's attention, preventing them from intervening in Germany sooner, was finally defeated, with Russia sending hundreds of thousands of soldiers to help out their Austrian ally. Freed up, Austria denounced Prussia's Erfurt Union, instead calling for the restoration of the German Confederation as it had existed before the revolutions, with the Austrian Emperor at its head. There was a real shot at war over the issue, as the Prince of the Grand Duchy of Hesse would officially ask the German Confederation for help in cracking down on revolts, when he cancelled the constitution he had previously granted his people. Austria was willing to send forces to help, but Prussia argued the German Confederation didn't even exist anymore, and they would respond to any forces entering Hesse with force. Germany found itself split, and even though we don't know exactly which state sided with whom, we do know Prussia had most support in the north, but that Austria, at the very least, had the support of the four most powerful German kingdoms. Austria, Bavaria and Württemberg would sign a treaty that stated that if Prussia intervened in their invasion of Hesse, the three would fight Prussia together. Gunfire was exchanged and Prussia mobilized. But the Austrian and Prussian foreign ministers met, and later Russia offered to mediate the dispute. And when it became very clear that Russia would side with Austria if needed, Prussia had to abandon their unification plans, and they agreed to rejoin the Austrian-led German Confederation. All of this is generally considered a major humiliation for Prussia, with the ultra-nationalist faction seeking unification being dealt a heavy blow. In light of the course of events I just described surrounding the Erfurt Union, it does not seem likely to me that if Prussia had, only a few months earlier, tried practically the exact same thing, except under an even more explicitly liberal constitution and basis, it would have worked out well for them. The most powerful German states were also always the ones most likely to abandon Prussia first. But even if Prussia somehow managed to get every single German state on their side, the moment the Hungarian Revolution gets cracked down upon, a war against Austria and Russia just wasn't winnable for this feeble new German state, and it's unlikely the Western great powers are coming in to save them. Now, I have heard arguments that the sheer power of nationalism would be too powerful to halt if Friedrich Wilhelm had agreed to take the throne. People across Germany would simply be raising the banner of the German Revolution and Prussia. In this regard, we can simply ask, if the power of nationalism was so much stronger than the power of incredible violence from Austria and Russia, then why did the Austrians succeed in restoring order in Italy? Why did the Hungarian Revolution get defeated? Why did the historical German revolutions get beaten? And why did so many liberal reforms granted in 1848 get reversed the moment the monarchs felt their position was secure? Fact is, revolutions are feeble things, and they are defeated more often than they are successful. Having the Prussian army on their side helps, but this is not the Prussian army of the 1860s, which had been reformed into the top-of-the-line army on the continent, successfully defeating Austria and France in swift succession. Instead, this is the Prussian army which had trouble defeating Denmark. Perhaps the only path to Prussian success is in an alternate timeline where Austria is already in significantly more trouble, and they act swiftly and decisively in unifying Germany. But even then, while Germany would now have a chance, Russia and Austria see this as an event on the same scale as the French Revolution, and the German position would still be feeble. Perhaps best case, a multi-front war could be launched with more successful Hungarian and Italian revolutions too. But by this point, we are changing so much about history before there is even a chance that accepting the crown from the gutter works out for Prussia. As even in a situation as dire as this, which we historically didn't get close to, the only armies which could rival the Russians in size or military budget were in Western Europe. And if it came down to it, an intervention by just Russia could still prove disastrous for Germany. So that concludes this little essay. In my opinion, it would have been extremely dangerous for Prussia to accept the crown from the gutter. It is far from a shortcut to a unified, liberal Germany at the heart of Europe. In the best case for Prussia, it ends up in the same way as the Erfurt Union, where they are forced to back down, being humiliated in the process. Worst case, it becomes more difficult to back down, and we risk a major war in 1850, which at best leads us back to the status quo anyways, but at worst risks Prussia being punished in some way, risking their later success in unification attempts, leaving Austria the indirect ruler over a decentralized German confederation.